What's up, everybody, and welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we're going to need to win. This week on the show, I'm joined by two leaders at Sheriff Accountability Action, Deputy Director Amber Walker and Director of Local Campaigns and Advocacy, Amaris Leon. We'll explore what the work the organization is doing to build people power to reduce the harm of the carceral system and create a foundation for real safety in communities across the country. But first, these headlines. Obviously, I cannot talk about the news this week without talking about Trump's rollout of what amounts to a military takeover of policing in Washington, D.C. Like most things the Trump administration is doing, it's another test case for what they want to do everywhere. First of all, let's talk about why this is happening in the first place. One of the reasons they're trying this with DC is because Congress has direct oversight of the city's budget and policy. Dozens of law enforcement agencies already operate in a patchwork of jurisdictions around the city. And the president does in fact have the ability to deploy the National Guard in the city for a 30-day period. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if and when the president asks Congress to extend that period so he can keep doing what he's doing. As a city, Washington, D.C. also has a couple of important demographic things in common with Los Angeles, the first city that Trump deployed troops to. D.C.'s population is a majority of people of color, and over 40% of its residents are Black. D.C. has a Black woman mayor, and though she's been troublingly scarce for the past week, it doesn't seem like a coincidence. Other cities that Trump has put on notice, including Chicago and my home city of Oakland, are also home to prominent political and business leaders of color and have Black mayors. Notably, Oakland and Chicago also have mayors with long progressive track records. So, Since deploying, the National Guard has been used to mainly harass the unhoused population of the city. It should come as a surprise to no one that the fascists are going after some of the most vulnerable people. And we already know that people who are unhoused are also more likely to have disabilities, and unhoused youth are more likely to be LGBTQ. But they won't stop there unless they are stopped, which is what local organization Free DC is ready to do. Since inauguration weekend, Free DC has been organizing DC locals to prepare for exactly this moment. Free DC has been holding monthly ward-level meetings to get neighbors in formation, help people keep people safe, and build the power to win home rule for the city. So if you are in DC, now is the time to get organized. You can sign up for an orientation at freedcproject.org and find the local folks in your ward who are in motion right now. They're trying to onboard people quickly so that they can do youth support, especially as young people go back to school, to do cop watch strolls and do non-cooperation trainings, and you can join them. If you aren't in the district, Free DC is explicitly asking for people not to just show up. They are asking for people to write to their members of Congress and use the power that they have to de-escalate the militarization of DC's streets and advance legislation that would give the DC mayor and city council actual power to govern. It's important that we spread the word about this, make noise about it wherever we can, and for those of us in places that they're going to try to do this next, get ready to make like DC and LA. We'll put links to Free DC's resources in the show notes. The other news that I have to talk about is that nobody outside of the world of professional public health seems to be even registering that somebody shot up its CDC building in Atlanta. And in case you also missed this story, a gunman armed with an automatic weapon fired nearly 500 rounds at the building and killed one officer on duty and eventually killed himself. Officials investigating the crime say that they found documents written by the gunman expressing his discontent with COVID-19 vaccines. Of course. I don't think we need to do too much dot connection here to understand where the real responsibility for this violence lies. Nor should we be surprised that when questioned about it, Mr. Maha himself, RFK Jr., denied any connection between the lies and conspiracies that he's been spreading about vaccines since, frankly, before the pandemic even started, to this shooting. And in fact, he chose to use the opportunity to double down in the face of the violence that he and his movement have caused, stating, quote, "One of the things that we saw during COVID is that the government was overreaching in its efforts to persuade the public to get vaccinated." For a guy that claims that he wants to make Americans more healthy, he sure has a lot of American blood on his hands. I want to take a quick moment right now to ask you to support Convergence during our summer fund drive. Reader and listener support is critical in a time when independent media is under existential threat. So if this podcast has, in fact, helped, consider what you can give back to make sure that we can keep making it. Anyone who starts an annual or monthly subscription, gives $25 or more, or upgrades an existing subscription will receive a special thank you gift in the mail. Head over to bit.ly/summerfunddrive, all one word, to make your contribution today. You can find that link, of course, in the show notes. My guests today are from Sheriff Accountability Action, which is the only national organization devoted to building power to curb the harms of the more than 3,000 sheriff's offices across the country. Today, I am joined by Deputy Director Amber Walker, who has worked for more than 15 years in the justice ecosystem, focusing on liberation and rest for Black and Brown folks, from addressing the housing and economic crisis to her current work, reimagining public safety and accountability. Amber, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for having us.
And I'm also joined by the Director of Local Campaigns and Advocacy with Sheriff Accountability Action, Amaris Leon. Her work with the organization is informed by her experience as a former foster care youth, a U.S. Supreme Court barred lawyer, and national electoral strategist specializing in constitutional office elections and decarceral policies. Amaris, thank you so much for joining me as well.
Thank you for having us.
To start us off a little bit, let's set some background here and talk a little bit about where Sheriff Accountability Action comes from and why your work focuses in particular on sheriffs. Amber, could you talk a little bit about the origins of the organization, where you come from, and why this is your focus?
Yeah, sure. So Sheriff Accountability Action, formerly we had a different name and we just rebranded a couple years ago. But Sheriff Accountability Action is a C4. We were founded in 2018 in North Carolina. Our founder, Max Rose, who recently transitioned our staff, started working with folks on the ground in North Carolina to take down just one sheriff who was really harming communities of color, specifically the immigrant population in a rural county outside of Raleigh-Durham area. And so they got together to try to take down the sheriff, and we're not able to, but that then started a group of people who decided that there needed to be long-term organizing around sheriffs and really ousting bad acting sheriffs who are harming communities in multiple ways. And so the organization was founded, and then from there, the kind of like beginning stages were like elections that oust really bad acting sheriffs. First in North Carolina, and then across the Southeast and the South, Midwest, and now all over the country.
Right on. Well, what is it about the office of the sheriff that makes it kind of a strategic fulcrum? Like, it seems like this is such a minute and specific thing. But I'm curious to hear from both of you kind of like what has been interesting about the office of the sheriff in particular. Maybe Amaris, we can start with you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the sheriff's office historically had really acted as a fiefdom. They are the top law enforcement officer of the county, meaning that the only people that they report back to in any formal capacity, by and large, are the voters. They're an elected position. In most jurisdictions, they are responsible for both policing on the streets and then taking care of people within the corrections facilities as well. They play a really large role in deportation efforts, but coincidentally, they can also mitigate their role in that as well. Same thing with a lot of harms that happen inside the jails, and also the capacity that the jails reach often are overcrowded. And sheriffs often have a really powerful say in all of those things and have the ability to reduce that harm. And like I said, really only they're elected, held accountable only by the people. And then as of recent years, there's been a large movement of constitutional sheriff's offices. 48 of our 50 states have the sheriff's office written into our constitutions, meaning it's almost impossible to get rid of them. But the concept of the constitutional sheriff's movement is that they are the chief law enforcement officers of the land, meaning they can deem any law unconstitutional, even if it comes from the president, even if it comes from the Supreme Court, even if it comes from the governor. So these are massively powerful seats.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll continue with the history of the sheriffs is that they've been around for a really long time, and they live in obscurity. So a lot of people, unless you are in a more rural county, that they are have power, and it's a lot of power that people don't even realize are affecting their daily lives. And so, like Amaris said, they control jails. They sometimes can act as coroners. They act as evictors. And they have a lot of power, a lot of many roles that they serve within the local context that gives them, power to really harm communities locally. And because of that, they're also, in some ways seen as kings in their like jurisdictions. And because of that, they're able to then influence the public really well, right? And because they have voting public that look to them and influence them, and then also, like I said, harm them.
Yeah. Well, it also strikes me that, like, I mean, certainly here where I live in Alameda County in California, often are like, I vote in basically every election. And like often when we have a sheriff up for election, there's not anybody running. It's just like uncontested. There's just nobody running. It's just like the same people over and over and over again. And it strikes me that like in this context where like there is a lot of organizing against the county jail and like how bad the conditions there are, that like, I don't know that I made the connection until I started learning about y'all's work that person that I can either vote for or abstain from voting for is kind of the person with whom the buck stops, which is like kind of nuts, right? That like there's not often not contested races for the office of sheriff. Is that really common across the country?
Yeah, I forget what the stat is. Years ago, there was a stat about DAs that I imagine runs very, very similar, but it was like 98% of DAs went unchallenged. And I have no reason not to believe that the sheriffs are close to, if not more. I probably, because nobody wants that office, but just kidding.
It's a whole other problem.
But historically, there's been an archetype of like what a sheriff is and who they come from, and so we've only had one kind of narrative of what a sheriff looks like.
Yeah, I mean, 90% of sheriffs are white men, and so like, that's one thing. Like Mary said, no one would want the office, but also, they have. They don't have term limits. And so, yeah, sheriffs can stay in office for forever, for years and years and years and years, right? And go uncontested. And, many people, even folks without law enforcement backgrounds can in some places run for sheriff. And, because of that's like a whole other set of issues. But I think that like a lot of folks who would maybe run have the feeling of like, oh, this could potentially be harmful, right? The sheriff has power in this place. Running against him can bring about issues and like, and problems I don't want. And so even folks who are deputies or sheriffs who sometimes we've seen run against their sheriff has brought up problems. And so I think a lot of times it feels like there's some fear that's being incited across counties that sheriffs kind of keep those roles.
Yeah.
And once they're in those, I was saying, once in those roles, like people see them as kings, right? So it's kind of hard to be outvoted.
Well, it's also like an interesting tension where it's like you're an elected official and also like you're the boss of a bunch of like armed sworn officers. Like it seems like a strange like and like uncomfortable like power seesaw kind of. And it makes sense to me why somebody would get entrenched in that, and then like they are also a manager ultimately of all of those people. And as a manager, responsible for creating culture inside of a law enforcement agency. And so that, I don't know, it just like feels like a tough place. Like, how did it come to be that sheriffs are elected in this country? Like, what's the deal with that?
That is a good question.
What is that about?
It's so like I said, the history of, I mean, if we take it back, right, the sheriff is a iteration of like a racist institution, like, right, slave catchers that then turn into like, right. And so because of that, like a lot of the practices are, very racist. Like as far as them becoming elected officials, it's a sheriff is a state office. And so it's written into the Constitution like that. I actually know the history of why they're elected, but that because they are elected, they have that specific special, like they're elected official and they're law enforcement. And so they're politicians, right? And so that gives them like a certain air of like, politics want to look a certain way, want to perform. They want to have a platform. They want to be seen as, I am doing this kind of good for my community and for the public. And they are public safety, but in terms of their law enforcement. And so that dynamic gives them like this weird kind of control that other local offices don't have, and also gives them, like I said, there's some level of, like, I would say maybe reverence, but mostly fear that people have of them because of that dynamic.
Sure. Well, let's talk about some specific campaigns and some campaign stories about the kind of work that you've been able to do. You mentioned that the origins of the organization came out of a sort of like failed attempt to contest a sheriff's race. But since then, what does your work look like, and where have you invested energy and resources to contest races?
Yeah, I'll start off with the C4 and election work that we've been doing. We have organized in countless states across the country. A couple of my favorite that are coming to mind, Paul Heroux in Bristol County, Massachusetts. We flipped that seat in 2023. We had a MAGA sheriff in that seat. Paul Heroux ran an excellent campaign, won, and now he's doing really amazing things of reimagining and restructuring what the reentry program looks like to holistically encompass food services, housing, healthcare, therapy, because he recognizes that all of those things are essential to someone's survival. And once survival needs are met, that immediately reduces the advantageousness of crime or harm happening. And something really interesting about Paul is that he is one of the few sheriffs that we have that don't come from policing pipe work. He has higher education degrees in criminology, and he's spent and dedicated his whole life to studying violence, how it happens, why it happens, and how to root it out. So that's one. Another we won two that we won last year, one in Culpeper, Virginia. We flipped that seat with an independent, Tim Chilton, the sheriff that was in before. Not only was he extremely MAGA, but after that election was soon after prosecuted for and charged with bribery and fraud. And talking about why everyone should care, even if you don't feel like you would be somebody impacted directly by policing work or the incarceration system. The bribery and fraud charges came about because he was exchanging favors to help somebody with their gun permitting who had lost those privileges because of a criminal conviction in exchange for campaign donations and favor. So he had, by the end of the summer, had accepted about $70,000 in campaign cash and campaign contributions as a result of threatening and offering favor. And also not only helping people restore their gun licenses, but making them auxiliary deputies, which is kind of like a sheriff's posse.
Yeah, that's
and so, and Tim Chilton, since coming into office, has really helped upheld his campaign promises. He initiated one of the county's first body-worn camera programs. And then same cycle last year, Byron Robertson in Johnson County, Kansas. We flipped that seat from red to blue. He's the first Democrat to hold that seat in 100 years. He's also the first African-American to ever hold that seat. So these elections have immense impact.
Yeah.
Long term.
And what I'll say to that is that the way that we work as the org, our main goals are reduce the harm that sheriffs cause the communities through elections, right? Ousting bad acting sheriffs, advocacy campaigns, supporting local efforts. So local issue and folks on the ground who are doing that work. We do that through regranting programming as well as strategy. And then building the field, right? Because sheriffs are so obscure and because this work is so new, a lot of folks who do issue work or who are doing work within the justice space aren't actually targeting sheriffs, and a lot of them are local. And the local sheriff has one of the most powerful offices in the county. And so we're like, hey, you all should be targeting sheriffs because this can also help reduce the harms that you all are working on in terms of your issues. And so expanding the field of folks who are working on sheriff accountability. And then thirdly, reimagining, right? What is the thing we're putting in place of the decentralization of this law enforcement office, right? Because accountability needs to happen. It's just that it doesn't need to be punitive and harmful and racist to people. It needs to be rehabilitative, and need to reimagine the office through figuring out what are the other ways that people can get their needs met. Like Mayor said, reduce the harms or reduce the things that cause people to actually commit crimes, and do the actual work that is long-term sustainable for local communities.
Yeah, no, that's big. And it feels like also this is one of those things that we track a lot on this show, what people are doing in their local communities to sort of like reinvigorate a sense of agency that people might have over like the systems of power that act on their lives. And like, I think one of the things that I find really exciting about y'all's work is exactly that it's like, oh wait, like we can make choices here, and that like with good organizing, those choices can actually be between like, it's not just like saying like I would rather not vote for anybody for this office, but actually vote for somebody who's like, oh, like, you know, it's not going to be perfect because it's still the system of policing that we have, but it's somebody who's like thinking more creatively about how we use this office to actually serve the community, instead of, you know, not a lot of these.
Totally. I mean, you know, we're really intentional about like loudly calling them harm reduction sheriffs, right? Like this is not an office that is going to push the Overton window. Like this is an office that is going to mitigate harm that happens on the daily basis inside and outside the community. And, you know, when it comes to advocacy and accountability work on the outside, you know, even once we put the sheriffs in, there is a natural tension that is going to, and maybe even has to happen, right? That's the whole accountability piece.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think the like work is right where we are in this moment in time. Sheriff offices aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So how do we use the office to then get the like needs that we have in our communities met? How do we use the office to actually, you know, produce the kind of public safety that we want? And so like part of that is harm reduction, right? Part of that is like getting the folks in the office who are actually going to listen to the folks, to their public, to their constituents, and that are going to then like, because of that accountability, change policies that actually get people what they need. And so that office that has, you know, that usually takes up more than half of the county's budget, right? Public safety is the line item for sheriffs. Then we're able to actually like move toward what the actually true public safety is, right? Because the sheriff's office as it stands is not working in terms of public safety. Not most of them. Many of them. Yeah.
Well, obviously I also have to ask, like, how has the work changed, if at all, since Trump got reelected? Like, what are the sort of like things on people's minds? I imagine obviously collaboration with ICE is a huge one. But what are other things? Are there any other things or issues that have been on people's radars in your work?
Yeah, I can start. You want me to start? Yeah. So like you said, of course, so sheriffs are the biggest amplifier and supporter and force multiplier of the immigration program, the federal immigration program in the country. They have, because they control jails, they have information about detainees. And so, you know, the 287G, which is the agreement that sheriffs signed to become either jail enforcement or task enforcement, like in terms of like patrolling, or warrant officers now, which is a new model that just recently has been amplified. But like those three models of agreements with ICE is how sheriffs can actually operate to detain, share information, hold, and now, you know, issue warrants to remove folks who are in the immigration system. And because of that, they are, you know, super harmful. Like ICE is a federal agency. Sheriffs are a local and state agency. And so ICE is now using the staffing, the capacities of the sheriff to do their work, and they don't pay them. So this is not like they're getting some kind of kickback. ICE does not provide funding for state or local agencies to carry out their programs. And so you're taking away actual resources, staffing, capacity for federal work, and then having sheriffs and deputies do this work. And so you're actually upending public safety, because local public safety, all of the time they're using to do this, they're not doing something else in the community they're supposed to be doing. So I would say that is the biggest thing that sheriffs have done. And I mean, I'm trying to think of other things that have happened over the last few months that are as important or even like on my radar, but it's really been that main thing.
Yeah, I mean, just the cooperation with ICE, or the federalization of law enforcement when they tried to take a stand against cooperating with ICE has been one of the biggest things. You know, we want to support sheriff candidates who understand the laws and the nuance of it. You know, you do not have, like, sheriffs do not have to honor ICE warrants. They only have to honor warrants that are signed by judges, and they're not, by and large. And, like Amber said, even before Trump's reelection and this like massive deportation agenda, only about 2% of what law enforcement does is the thing we think that they do, which is to respond to violent crime. They are issuing gun permits. They are, in New York City, they used to be in charge of credentialing the press, which is the most fascist shit I've ever heard of.
That's wild.
They've changed it since then. But, so even before this, the thing that like we all think that they do and some of us want them to do only makes up 2% of what they're actually doing. And now it's probably less than that.
Yeah, no, that also is really interesting that it's like there's such important narrative work happening like inside of these campaigns to like really like trouble the idea that we have of what law enforcement even does in this country, which is like seems, I don't know, we were just actually talking this morning like about the like National Guard in DC of it all, just that like so much of the mainstream media narrative about everything's like everything's chaos, everything's wild. The only thing standing between us and like complete societal collapse are like cops, and it's just like, like it's wild. And I think that like one of the things that's interesting about what you're talking about is just like here are some ways that we can actually concretize this for people and like pull back the curtain a little bit so people can see how stuff actually works.
Totally. And then I think a collateral consequence is like the virtue signaling, right? It is officers who either want to like be a part of it. And I think you're at the top of your producer is saying somebody in his neck of the woods is like, I'll do it. I'll, participate in this like horrible agenda. And it really was like giving pick me girl vibes. But like that is what's happening. And so it's like really, it's taking away public trust. It is literally taking away public safety. It's also taking away public resources as well. Like Amber said, they will threaten to take away resources if you do not cooperate, but they do not offer to give resources for cooperating.
Yeah. And even other, I mean, as far as like Mary said, mentioned earlier, like, the voting public is how sheriffs are elected. And so like in terms of the powers that be, governors can also have some, jurisdiction over sheriffs in terms of their removal or the way that, like the way they go through courts to potentially, any kind of punitive measures. But, in Florida, for instance, Governor DeSantis really pushed and pressured all of his sheriffs to like mandated them to sign agreements. And so every county in Florida has signed a 287G agreement through DeSantis kind of pressuring. Now he's, this the last few days because ICE is now offering big paychecks for folks to join. And so now he's like, trying to like put out a call like, hey, don't, make sure that your staff doesn't go to ICE, like basically like trying to get them to not sign on. But I'm like, you just first now you wanted them to be a task force, you wanted them to do these agreements, and now you're telling them, but don't actually, become federal enforcement, like truly, because then you're really upending all of these counties in your states, capacity to actually work for public safety within their counties. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. It like there's a squeeze from both sides in that case. That's like, again, one of the other things that we love to track on this show is like, where are there cracks, right? Like where are there exploitable cracks in the sort of edifice of consolidating fascism?
This whole, it's absolutely crazy. Like the whole narrative, even like talking about the narrative stuff, like in terms of what real public safety is, like this is their whole thing. Like, oh, well, immigrants don't keep us safe, and getting them out of our country is how we're going to be safe. And I'm like, in the way that you are saying, at the same time as you all are saying this, what you all are doing is actually upending our safety, because you all are literally having people have less time to actually like answer and support what real communities need in terms of public safety. And so it's really actually asinine and not well thought through, not strategic.
Yeah. And I pulling back the curtain on how that is so like they're working at cross purposes with themselves in a lot of cases is like, I think it helps. Like exposing the absurdity helps.
Really. Absolutely.
Well, could you walk us through a little bit of like the anatomy of like a sheriff accountability campaign? How do you put it together? How do you identify a contestable race? And what is it like working with folks on the ground in different places? Because it sounds like you're working in a lot of like very different kinds of counties too.
Absolutely. We are a national organization, but we do local work just in a lot of different places. It's fascinating and I love it. And each community, while very different in a lot of respects, we're the same in the most important respect, which is we all want to feel safe. We all want to have our needs met. And like, let's figure out how to do that. So, I mean, the anatomy of a sheriff's campaign, I hate to give like the lawyer answer, it depends, but it really does. You can't run the same kind of race you do in Philly that you do in Memphis, Tennessee, or you do in, Arizona. But, a lot of things that we look for, one, we want to harm reduction is the name of the game. So like we do a lot of research on like who the worst sheriffs are, where the most harm is happening. Sometimes we take into consideration like the populace, amount of like how many people are being impacted. And then also like we work in lockstep with local partners. We don't come in and say, this is a sheriff race we're going to do. And we don't talk to anybody on the ground. And so for recruitment efforts, for identifying efforts, we really like rely on local partners to come to us with information, with candidate recruitment, of course, and we do what we can to support not only like the recruitment efforts, but then on the campaign front, sometimes we run coordinated, but most of the time just I am on the IE side, and then Amber and I, we run parallel silos or parallel buckets. We're certainly not siloed from each other because the work feeds in, all the work, and I'll let her talk more about it, but the on the ground, like C3 voter education work that she's doing, that helps us build really strong, genuine connections with local partners, and which allows us to have that feedback in real time when sheriff elections are coming up, what's happening. So we are already kind of naturally plugged in, and vice versa. If somebody comes to me and it's like, this is happening, I'm like, well, the election's next year, but what we can do is plug you in with Amber and like, let's figure out some kind of like media strategy or like voter, like town hall strategy to start like chipping away at like what these people are doing.
Yeah, like all of our work is we are in service to the local communities. And so folks that are impacted, folks that are organizing, folks that have been on the ground and understand like their unique communities ecosystem and like what the needs are, like that's how we are able to then decide, okay, yes, there's a political will here. Folks are actually, want to engage. We have the like people power. Of course we use polling, right, to just see like, okay, some sheriffs are just difficult. Like we've been working in East Baton Rouge for probably almost 10 years. And the org's been around for about 8. And so like even about 8 to 10 years, we've been working there, and we have organizers who've been on the ground every day. There's a lot of Louisiana is the worst carceral state in the country, right? I live in Louisiana. And so we've been working really deeply here. And even still, like the sheriff that is there, it's been hard to upend him just because of the power he has. But there is a strong political will. There's a lot of folks on the ground who want to do the work. And so we've been able to, do issue campaigns and have like and ballot initiatives that like do chip away at that harm and that do actually move us toward the incremental change that we want. And so like that is one of the things that we look for is like, is there political will? Are people actually on the ground like that want us there? They want our support. We know a big part of what we do is regranting, right? And helping to like shine lights on local communities so that they can actually have the funds they need to run a winning campaign, because we, as we can do all the like, all the voter programs and all of the door knocking and all of but we need money. We need money to win campaigns. And so and a lot of that is narrative, right? Narrative work. And so like having the folks there on the ground who we can actually like shine a light on, support, and say, hey, this is what's been going on organizing over these years, and like really like this is winnable, like with the right pieces, right? Yeah. Is how we are able to then like win campaigns. Go ahead.
Yeah. And aside from like the, policies that, we are the staple of like our values, right? Like ending mass deportation, reforming the criminal justice system, taking a public health approach. I'm also spending a lot of time with like the archetype of the sheriff and what that looks like. Some jurisdictions require that they come from law enforcement or credentialed law enforcement. Some don't. And in jurisdictions that aren't, that gives us a lot of leeway. Some of the most interesting candidates I've had come like our social workers who worked inside jails and prisons, have studied public health or public administration. We really can change not only like the policies that run the office, but we can change like what the sheriff looks like and diversify that as well.
Yeah, that is really interesting too, that like not everybody requires you to be somebody who is like a sworn police officer. That's like, and the idea of having a sheriff who is like a social worker, obviously, like it seems very clear to me like that person's gonna orient towards like how a jail is run than somebody who is coming in with a more sort of like, I don't know, stereotypical like hard driving
law and order.
Yeah. That like, I don't know. I still think a lot about like just like what early COVID was like in jails and prisons in this country, and just like how much unnecessary suffering and illness and death happened just because people like, we think of jails as culturally as places just to warehouse people who are excess, who are undesirable, and like what it would be like to think about running those places in ways that are like, there are human beings here, not just a warehouse of excess life or something.
Yeah. I mean, one of our biggest campaigns is to end jail deaths, and jail deaths happen because of inhumane conditions within jails, and a lot of those are preventable. And jail is a place that folks exist that is, most people are held pre-trial, which means they have not been convicted of a crime, so they are held.
Oh no, Amber's connection.
There I am.
Oh, there you are.
I'm like, I was still here, but I couldn't see y'all. So sorry. But yeah, so basically, folks are sitting in jails because sometimes they just unable, because they're poor and then able to pay their bails to get out. And they're in on top of that, inhumane conditions, right? And so they're losing time with family and friends. They're living, they're losing their livelihoods, and then they're sitting in inhumane conditions where people die in jails every day for something as simple as, if it's drug use and they just need like they're overdosing, and Narcan could solve that. Or if it's just like the facilities aren't habitable because of like heating and cooling, like things like that. People die in jails every day because of that. Very preventable things. And a lot of folks just don't know about it because jails are not a place of visibility. But they're a place where hundreds of thousands of people go through those walls every year, and people are dying in really bad ways because of it. And so one of our biggest campaigns is to really shine a light on how that is happening, the ways it's happening, the ways that are preventable, and then to really build a movement around folks who can understand, like, we need to be actually organizing to end jail deaths. And so one of the ways to do that is to reduce people in jails. Another way is to oust bad sheriffs and put in sheriffs, like Mayor said, who have that humane context and who are like, people shouldn't be sitting here and dying. And and so those are the couple of ways that we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to that, I think like just it feeds into narrative work, but really just like organizing people, organizing your neighbors. I think it's really easy to other people who are incarcerated, especially if that is not something that has touched your life or your family or your orbit. But the reality is, people who like come through the jails and then ultimately sometimes end up in prison, 98% of our incarcerated population are people who have already been victimized by harm and did not get the help or the resources or the out that they needed. And so really like working to like humanize people, like we all commit harm and I die on that hill. And the amount of harm that we cause to other people is in direct correlation with the tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Could you tell me a little bit about some of the contestable sheriff's races that you're keeping an eye on in the next like cycle or so? Like what places are on your radar, and what work is already happening?
Yeah, I mean, this year is more of a planning year. We've got 2 really exciting races that are happening in November. They're general elections, one in Columbia County, New York. Jackie Salvatore is the current undersheriff. It is an open seat, so she is running for that. Stand-up candidate, incredibly committed to creating more opportunities for community engagement that have nothing to do with policing. And also, she's very open about being somebody whose family has been impacted by substance use disorders and addiction. And so she comes to the work with the lens with covering that. And then we have Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Danny Sliceler. He is Afghan war vet, Bronze Star awardee, has done a ton of work both in the Pentagon and for Governor Shapiro's office, really has dedicated his life to public safety, both abroad and locally. And he is running to flip the seat from red to blue against MAGA sheriff. And not only does he have direct ties to the Trump administration, so Fred Herron is the current sheriff of Bucks County. He entered into an illegal 287G agreement. It's illegal because the structure and by statute, the Pennsylvania Sheriff's Office cannot unilaterally enter into contracts without the approval of the county supervisors, which he did not have. And now he is in a lawsuit with ACLU. And guess who is representing that case and paying for the legal fees? Stephen Miller's nonprofit.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so those are coming up in November. And then 26 is going to be a huge midterm year. Some of the jurisdictions that we are really looking to organize in rural West areas. And, obviously active candidate recruitment is currently happening. So can't give too many details away at this point, but a couple of the jurisdictions that are on our radar, Jefferson County, Kentucky, so Louisville, they're going to have the first open sheriff seat since 1998.
Oh, wow.
So that is, regardless of what happens in that race, it's going to be historic on those fronts. Did
that sheriff retire? What happened there? Did he retire or did he pass?
No, no, he is retiring because he's 50 years old.
Literally.
So he is retiring. Nothing horrible has happened to him. But, and he's a Democrat in name, but a lot of, Amber, you know this because you live in the South, a lot of vestiges of like pre and post-Civil War. A lot of people in the South have a D next to their name, but in actuality are not Democrats. Yeah. We have come to know them today. So that one is something that I'm keeping my eye on. We're also keeping our eye on 2 of the most populous counties in Nebraska, Lancaster and Douglas, so Omaha and Lincoln. And then Bob Songer in Klickitat, Washington. It's a very rural, very small community, but Bob Songer is horrible. He has one of the largest sheriff posses in the country. And for those who don't know what a sheriff posse is, they are volunteer deputies, and they are accountable to no one other than the sheriff who appoints them. So they have all of the same discretions. They get to wield very similar badge. They get to wield similar uniform, but cannot be fired by anybody but the sheriff.
That's wild.
Yeah. So the sheriff posse size is 170 people, which is 3 times the size of his paid deputy staff.
Wow. Yeah. And they don't have any law enforcement background certifications. Actually, I didn't tell you this, Amaris. I was just talking to one of the folks at Western State Center, and they're trying to get a legislation passed to actually require certification, peace officer certification, because this would then get rid of a lot of those folks who probably can't even pass it because they don't have the intellect. I said, and I'm not even trying to find, it's serious. Like the posse, these folks who they are deputized by sheriffs to be law enforcement, these are think about your rural, I didn't finish high school kind of education type people. It's those kinds of folks who are doing this kind of work. And it's you are giving them the jurisdiction to be officers, peace officers, this is what public safety looks like in some places. This is crazy.
Yeah. And that comes with an awful lot of privilege.
Exactly.
In terms of, the way people are treated by courts, the way people are treated by society. Yeah, That's it's wild to think that somebody just has basically a private army that's 3 times the size of the like professionalized like sworn officer corps.
Yep.
Well, one of the other things I'm curious about with especially stories like this, like when you identify these races, when communities come to you, when people start seeing this as a possibility, like what are the effects that you see in the community of that kind of thing? Like what are the sort of like effects on the people who are doing the organizing of seeing these races as contestable?
Yeah, go ahead, Maris.
I mean, I think that it's incredibly empowering. A lot of work that we do and make sure to encompass in the work is identifying groups on the ground who are organizing specifically Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, low-income communities who are like directly impacted by these offices, and typically turn out in a smaller percentage for these races, mostly because they don't know that they like can vote for them.
Sure.
And so organizing, I think it's really empowering. I think it's like an amazing education piece. I think that talking about the interconnectivity of the sheriff's office and public safety, and then the broader scope of like what actually keeps us safe. And like I said, housing keeps us safe, food keeps us safe, school keeps us safe, jobs keep us safe. And I think that organizing around the sheriff's office has like a really unique ability to get people to like make the connective tissue between all of their local offices. And like in Nebraska, there's a wonderful C3 organization who they have they organize in Indigenous, Black and Brown communities, and they really want to dig into the power of the sheriff's office as a primer. And their membership base are people who are like most likely going to be impacted, if not already impacted, by Trump's mass deportation agenda. And so those are some of like the immediate impacts that we see that embolden people to start organizing longer term and more holistically.
Yeah, and what I would say is that we actually did a study specifically around like young voters of color, and we're able to turn out back in like 2020. We were able to work with a couple of local partners in a couple places, California, Texas, and really through narrative work and through like people actually understanding like the power sheriffs have, we're able to turn out young voters of color 6 times more than they would in congressional race, because they realized that it was affecting them, right? That like they could see, oh, us voting for this office actually creates like immediate like direct change to our lives. And so because of that, that like analysis, the shifting and like narrative change was able to turn out more voters and say, oh, this is like local, like, right. There's a big push like lately in the last few years to like vote local, because voting local actually is what's happening, supporting effective. Of course, now we have Trump in the office. It's like, it's probably like there used to be some level of like disparity, and now it's probably similar. But in terms of like, what we see is that like this is a really important office because it directly affects folks, and like being able to then support the like folks on the ground who are doing the work to like really make that change is really helpful.
That's great.
And it does help in some cases increase turnout for the top of the ticket, not the other way around. Just
exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Do some real bottom up stuff in terms of helping people understand what politics actually can be. And what impact it has on their lives. Well, I mean, for folks who might be feeling kind of animated about the idea that this is a lever that they can pull in their community, what advice and guidance would you give listeners who might be like, oh, wow, I wonder if anybody is thinking about contesting the sheriff in my county?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, for elections, for sure, Amaris, I mean, she is the expert. She's been doing this stuff for years, and two orgs. She just joined our org a few months ago. We're so happy to have her. But as far as like the advocacy and issue work, like we actually just launched a platform. So Sheriff Accountability Actions, our C4, our political vehicle, and then we have a more public-facing political education and reimagining space called Safety Bound, and that's safetybound.org. We are a platform that basically seeks to reimagine the sheriff's office and educate folks on the harms so that folks can actually mobilize, and we can expand folks who are working on the issue. And so We launched platform yesterday. 7 demands.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. I know I was like, I'm gonna get to the end. 7 demands to reimagine the sheriff. Safetybound.org/demands. You all can go there. We partnered with about 10 orgs across the country, national and local, that are working on these 7 big issues. One including immigration, sheriff campaign finance, deaths in custody, pretextual traffic stops, elections. There's 2 other ones I can't think of right now, but yeah, 7 demands that are kind of big bucket issues of how sheriffs work that are harming, and basically put that out as a one-pagers for each one, and then resources. So if you want to get started in your local context and say, I have issues with these different ways. I mean, I don't think bad acting sheriffs is one of the main ways you can do that, right? Taking the sheriff out who's doing the harm, but the issues to push them or to like figure out what the accountability measures. There are resources on safetybound.org/demands. Safetybound.org as a website is also existing. And then we actually have a tool that we released a few months ago called Call Your Sheriff. And that's also on the website, where you can directly call your sheriff, put your county in. You can call them directly and say, hey, I don't want you to work with ICE or having agreements with ICE. Hey, I don't want you doing any practices, like whatever, every county's different, but that's the place they can start.
Incredible.
Yeah, anybody who's looking, start with Amber, get involved, do the issue-based work, take that back to your communities and your local groups. And then when elections are coming, or even before, if you want a primer, recruitment, hit me up, email me, send a smoke signal, I don't care. Let me know. We would love to partner with as many local orgs as possible to shift narratives and seats.
Amazing. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want our listeners to know about y'all's work?
I'm such a dreamer. Change is possible. I know that it's bleak right now. The world seems crazy. We have so much happening to upend democracy, and there is a feeling of doom for sure. And I mean, you should feel like things are hard. You should feel like things are heavy, and you should also know we are still fighting. That we can't back down now. Now it's time to lean in. Now it's time to double down, to stand on business, and not to say, not to just comply early, not to comply ever, right? We need to figure out what are the strategies and pieces, the ways that we do that. And one of them is through this work. And figure out in your local context where you can be supporting, what's proximal to you that can support the efforts to really push change that is long-lasting, sustainable, and have people thriving.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll double down, now is the time to really lock in, and just to remind folks, Jim Crow was legal, slavery was legal, legality is not the same thing as morality. And right. So when, injustice becomes law, our, duty is resistance. So come rock with us.
Let's go.
Period.
Well, thank you both so much for making the time to talk about y'all's work today. I find it so, I'm always so excited to find folks who are looking for levers that have just not been pulled yet, or haven't been pulled in decades in some cases. Because now is the time to put it all on the table. We cannot afford to play this one close to the vest. So
yeah. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome. My thanks again to Amber and Amaris for joining me today. You can find ways to connect with Sheriff Accountability Action in the show notes. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Caden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Kimmy David designed our cover art. If you have something to say or a question, please drop me a line. You can send me an email that we'll consider running on an upcoming mailbag episode at mailbag@convergencemag.com. And finally, of course, if you'd like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. Even a few bucks a month goes a long way to making sure that our small team can continue to build this map for our movements. I hope this helps.